Heinrich closed the front door and Felicitas went upstairs. How friendly and homely the narrow passage seemed with its stale, shut-in air as it turned off to one side above and wrapped itself round the girl hurrying through. Then came a quiet, remote landing. A dull light filtered through bottle green panes, fell on crooked walls, on a clumsy, worm-eaten handrail rising out of ominous dimness below, and on a very old door stiffly painted with tulips and brick-red roses. Felicitas took a key from her pocket and silently opened it. Behind a narrow, dark stair led up to the attic. The hazardous route across the roofs she had had to take only once. From that day on, her visits to the old maid's secluded cell were unrestricted. In the first years, she had gone up only on Sundays, and then Heinrich had gone with her. But after her confirmation, the old maid had given her the key to the painted door, and from then on, Felicitas used every free minute to slip upstairs. So she led a double life. Outwardly, she moved between height and depth, between murky twilight and clear sunlight. Her soul did the same. Gradually, she had grown so strong that all the shadows and gloom of the lower regions fell from her as soon as she set her foot on the narrow stair. Downstairs, she wielded flat iron and ladle. Her so-called leisure hours had to be filled with embroidery, whose proceeds, as we have seen, were destined for charitable purposes. And beyond the Bible and a prayer book, all reading was strictly forbidden her. In the attic, by contrast, the wonders of the human mind opened before her. She learned with real hunger, and the knowledge of the mysterious recluse up there was like an inexhaustible spring, a cut diamond, flinging sparks in every direction. No one in the house knew of this intercourse save Heinrich. The faintest suspicion on Mrs. Hellwig's part would, of course, have meant its instant death. Even so, the old maid had always impressed upon the child that she must tell the strict truth if ever she were questioned. The need never arose. Heinrich watched faithfully, on the alert with eye and ear. Felicitas had climbed the dark stairs and now stood listening before a door. Then she slipped aside a little sliding shutter and looked in, smiling. Inside, pandemonium reigned. A strange, delightful mixture of singing, chirping, and shrieking. 2 fear trees rose in the middle of the room. Along the walls ran shrubberies, such as few gardens could show fresher, and among the branches dwelt a merry tribe of birds. This was the living company the old maid had gathered into her hermitage. The tiny throats sang always the same tunes, but at least they did not know that disastrous change of the human tongue which cries, "Hosanna today," and "Crucify him" tomorrow. Felicitas closed the shutter and opened the second door. The reader has already, years ago, cast a glance into this ivy-hung room. He knows the assembly of grave heads that lines the walls, but not yet the close connection between them and those large red Morocco volumes piled in an old-fashioned glass cabinet. A mighty flood has flowed out of those brows. Whoever knows how to release it can never again be lonely or forsaken. The great masters of music from many periods, in portrait and in their works, shared the old maid's refuge, and just as the ivy twined impartially round all the busts, so passionately and without prejudice did she love Italian as well as German music. The cabinet also held treasures that would have transported any autograph collector. Manuscripts and papers of those mighty men, most of them rare, lay in portfolios behind the glass. The collection had been formed in earlier years when, as Aunt Cordula said with a smile, her blood still ran hot in her veins, and there was energy enough behind every desire. Many a yellowed sheet had been won only by great sacrifice and tireless perseverance. Felicitas found the old maid in a small room behind the bedroom. The little lady was crouching on a footstool before an open cupboard, and all around her, on chairs and floor, lay rolls of white linen and flannel, and a whole array of those small things which a human infant demands immediately after its first cry. She turned her head as the girl entered. Her fine features had changed noticeably, and though they now expressed lively joy, they could not hide the traces of decay. "Good that you come, my dear Fee," she cried. "At Master Thieneman's the stork may be expected at any moment, the charwoman tells me, and they have not the least bit of linen for the poor baby. Our store is still quite respectable. We shall get together a very nice bundle. Only this is missing." She set a little pink cotton cap on her small fist and held a narrow white lace edging to it. "You could finish this at once, Fee," she went on. "The things must be taken over without fail this evening." "Oh, Aunt Cordula," said Felicitas, taking needle and thread, "that alone will not help them. I know quite well that Master Thieneman also needs money. 25 bright thalers." The old maid reflected. That is a little much for my present finances," she said, "but it shall be managed." She rose with effort. Felicitas gave her an arm and led her into the music room. "Aunt," she said suddenly, standing still, "you have not forgotten, have you, that Mrs. Thieneman lately refused to do your washing so as not to offend Mrs. Hellwig?" "I do believe you mean to lead your old aunt onto thin ice," cried the old maid sharply, yet mischief sparkled in her eyes. She stroked Felicitas's cheek with the tips of her fingers. Both laughed and went over to the glass cabinet. That heavy old piece of furniture had its secrets, too. Aunt Cordula pressed a harmless-looking ornament, and a narrow door in the side opened. The recess thus revealed was the old maid's bank, and in earlier days it had possessed, for Felicitas's childish eyes, all the charm of a Christmas tree. She had only rarely been granted a shy, half-satisfied glimpse of the treasures stored there. On the narrow shelves lay rolls of money, silver pieces, and jewelry. While the aunt broke the seal of a roll and carefully counted the thalers, Felicitas took a box from the darkest corner and opened it curiously. Inside lay a gold bracelet resting softly on cotton wool. No precious stones glittered upon it, but it was heavy in her hand and must have been solid gold. Particularly striking was its size. It would have slipped over a lady's hand and seemed rather intended for a man's strong wrist. Toward the center it grew much broader, and there the engraver's tool had marvelously twined roses and fine foliage into a medallion. Around it ran the verse, "Swa zwei lieb einander meinend herzlichen Anwank und sich beide so vereinend." The girl turned the bracelet this way and that, looking for the continuation, for though she did not understand Middle High German, she had no difficulty in rendering the last line as, "And when the two are thus united," but that could not be the end. "Aunt, do you not know the rest?" she asked, still searching. The old maid, her finger resting on a newly counted thaler, looked up. "Oh, child! What have you laid hands on there?" she cried sharply. Annoyance, fear, and pain all in her voice. She snatched up the bracelet, laid it in the box with a trembling hand, and pressed down the lid. A faint red spot burned suddenly on one cheek, and the drawn brows gave her face something dark and brooding, a look the girl had never seen. Indeed, it seemed as though the present had vanished beneath a sudden flood of memories, as though the old lady had forgotten Felicitas's presence altogether. For after thrusting the box hastily back into its corner, she took a second casket, gray paper covered, which stood beside it, and passed her right hand lingeringly over its battered edges. Her features softened, she sighed and murmured, holding it to her hollow breast. "It must die before me, and yet I cannot bear to see it die." Felicitas threw her arms anxiously about the frail little body that now looked so helpless. In all their 9 years together, it was the first time the aunt had lost command of herself. For all her physical frailty, she had always shown a strangely strong mind and an unshaken inner calm which no outward event had been able to disturb. She had loved Felicitas with every fiber of her heart and poured all her knowledge, her clear and sensible view of life, into the young soul. But upon her past there still lay, as 9 years before, seal and bolt. And now Felicitas, thoughtless, had touched that jealously guarded fragment of life, and blamed herself bitterly. "Oh, Aunt, forgive me," she begged. How childishly moving this young girl could be in her entreaty, she whom Mrs. Hellwig called a mule-head and a block of wood. The old maid passed her hand over her eyes. "Be quiet, child. You have done no wrong. It is I babbled like a dotard," she said in a dead tone. "Yes, I am old and weary. Once I could bite my teeth together, my tongue lay still behind them, and outwardly I stood firm. That will not do any more. It is time I laid myself down." She still held the narrow casket in her hands, as though she lacked the courage to carry out at once the death sentence she had spoken. After a few moments, however, she suddenly set it back in its place and shut the cupboard. With that, her outward composure seemed to return. She went to the little round table where the money lay counted, took up the roll again, and added 2 more thalers to the pile. "We'll wrap the money in clean paper," she said, though her voice still betrayed the remnants of inner turmoil, "and tuck the little packet into the red cap. It will bring a blessing with it, even before the young head goes in. And Heinrich must be at his post at 9 sharp this evening. Do not forget." The old maid, indeed, had her quirks. She shunned the light, at least in her deeds. They woke, like bats, only with the night and tapped at the caves of poverty when the streets were empty and eyes were tired. For many years, Heinrich had been the right hand, whose work the left was not to know. He carried the old maid's gifts into poor houses with such cunning and invisibility that he seemed to slip out of his heavy manservant shell for these errands. So it came about that many in the town unwittingly ate the bread of the old Mamsell, of whom they believed and swore the most monstrous tales. A strange trait indeed in those pious souls who clung with the greatest fervor to the Bible text, "Let your light so shine before men." While Aunt Cordula wrapped the money with scrupulous care, Felicitas opened the glass door out to the gallery. It was the end of May. Oh, you much-sung spring, how few know your reign in Thuringia. You are not that fair, riotous boy of the South, whose blood foams like champagne, and at whose footstep orange blossom and myrtle spring without effort. Majesty rests on your brow, and on your lips lies the quiet smile of deep, creative thought. Your hand mixes its colors deliberately and underpaints its pictures in leisurely calm. We follow your brushstrokes with gentle joy. They are not bold and tempestuous, but lovely and full of tender grace. The brown-green down that gathers on the breasts of the wooded hills while the snow crown still sits untouched above, the fine lacework of young blades and grasses over brown clods and last year's dead turf. You change all this gradually and softly into May boughs and nosegays of violets and snowdrops. Only after long pondering and guarding do you at last, like a careful gardener, bring out the thousandfold blaze of color from sheltered beds and spread it over hedges, meadows, and banks. And the breath of your mouth is that strong, tart air that steels the nerves and sinews of Thuringian folk, that makes their hearts receptive to song and able to endure stubbornly in poetic superstition, that keeps alive their sense of justice, their inclination to opposition, their naively faithful temper, and their heavenly roughness. Far away, the green bands of the wheat fields detached themselves from the edge of the forest and ran down into the valley. The youngest cherry tree, no less than the gnarled wild pear, stood at the field's border in white, shining bloom, on very different pedestals, the same youthful crown, an impartiality of nature for which man can only long in vain. On the gallery rail bloomed hyacinths, lilies of the valley, and tulips. To either side of the glass door stood sturdy lilac and snowball bushes in tubs. Felicitas pushed the little round table into the glassed-in corner and set the old maid's comfortable armchair beside it. She laid a fresh napkin, made the small coffee machine ready, and placed the half-finished baby clothes beside it. Soon the brass pot was hissing, and a delicious scent of mocha drifted out onto the gallery. The old maid sat cozy in her chair and gazed dreamily into the sunlit spring world. Felicitas had taken up her sewing again. "Aunt," she said after a short pause, weighing each word, "he comes tomorrow." "Yes, my child, I read it in the paper. It says from Bonn, Professor Hellwig goes for 2 months' recreation to Thuringia. He has become a famous man, Fee." "His fame must sit light on him. He does not know what a torment compassion can be beside duty. He cuts into the flesh and into the souls of his fellow men with the same composure." The old maid looked up in surprise. That tone of bitter scorn was new to her. "Take care you are not unjust, my child," she said at last, slowly and with indescribable gentleness. Felicitas raised her head. In that instant, her brown eyes seemed almost black. "I do not know how I could think more kindly of him," she replied. "He has gravely sinned against me, and I know I should never regret any misfortune that befell him. And if it were in my power to help him to some happiness, I would not lift a finger." "Fee." "Yes, Aunt, that is the truth. I have always brought you a calm face because I would not embitter our scant hours together. You have often believed my soul at peace when it was in storm. Let yourself be trodden in the dust, day after day, hour after hour. Hear your parents reviled, hear them called accursed of God, to whom you are said to owe all your supposed faults. Feel within yourself the striving after something higher, and see yourself, amid mocking laughter, thrust down into the uneducated sphere because you are poor and have no claim to higher culture. Watch those who torment you, wearing the halo of piety and destroying you unpunished in the Lord's name. If you endure all this calmly, if not a drop of blood in you rebels, if you can forgive, then that is not the patience of an angel, but the cowardly submission of a weak soul that deserves to have a foot set on its neck." She spoke firmly, in a deep, resonant voice. What command this strange young creature had over her outward self! She scarcely lifted a hand as the passionate words poured from her lips. "The very thought of standing face to face with that stone mask again excites me beyond measure," she went on after drawing a deep breath. "With that voice without heart or soul, he will repeat, word for word, what he has inflicted on me in writing these 9 years. Like the cruel boy who lets a winged creature flutter on a string, so has he bound me to this dreadful house and turned my uncle's last will into a curse for me. Can anything be more cruel than his conduct toward me? I was not allowed to have intellectual gifts, nor a soft heart, nor sensitive pride, all that was forbidden to a player's child. The shame of its origin could be atoned for only by its becoming a so-called handmaid of the Lord, one of those poor creatures with the narrowest possible horizon. Well, we have got past that, my child, said Aunt Cordula with a faint smile. Besides, his arrival will certainly mark a turning point for you, she added seriously. After many battles, no doubt. Mrs. Hellwig comforted me today by saying that then everything would come to an end. Well, and then I shall no longer have to tell you that you must stay below in honor of the last will of him who took you into his house and loved you like his own child. Then you are wholly free, and will be nurse to your old aunt before all the world, and we shall no longer have to fear being torn apart, for those downstairs will have relinquished their right. Felicitas' eyes shone. She quickly seized the withered little hand and pressed it to her lips. And do not think worse of me now, Aunt, since you have looked deeper into me than before, she pleaded gently. I love people, and I think highly of them, and when I fought so hard against spiritual death, part of what spurred me was the thought of being, among them, something more than a mere beast of burden. If some treat me badly, I am far from turning the accusation against all mankind. I am not even mistrustful of it. But I am not capable of loving my enemies or blessing those who curse me. If that is a dark spot in my character, I cannot help it, and Aunt, I do not wish to, for here lies the hair-fine boundary between mildness and lack of character. Aunt Cordula was silent, her troubled eyes on the floor. Had she, too, known an hour in her life when she could not forgive, or only by unspeakable effort? She intentionally let the subject drop, took needle and thread herself, and soon they were both sewing in silence. By the time evening fell, a handsome bundle was ready. Deep within lay a silver core, the small capital that the poor carpenter had begged in vain from the God-favored, and which he now unknowingly received from the hands of the so-called unbeliever. When Felicitas left the old maid's rooms, the front house was already astir. She heard little Anna, the counselor's widow's child, laughing and chattering, and the hall on the second floor echoed with heavy hammer blows. The girl flew along the corridor leading to the vestibule. There stood Heinrich on a ladder, fastening garlands above a door. Seeing Felicitas, he pulled a grotesque face in which anger, mockery, and good humor struggled together, banged a few more times savagely on the unfortunate nail heads, as though he meant to smash them to pulp, and then climbed down. Little Anna had been holding the ladder with solemn gravity in case it should fall. But when she caught sight of Felicitas, she forgot her important office, waddled clumsily up to her, and twined her little arms lovingly round the girl's knees. Felicitas lifted her and took her into her arms. "Don't they carry on as though a wedding were to be in the house tomorrow?" muttered Heinrich softly, annoyed. "And meanwhile there's one coming who looks neither right nor left, and goes about all day with a face as if he'd swallowed vinegar. Look there, even forget-me-nots are in it," he added, lifting one end of the garland. "Well, the one who twined this will know why. But Fietchen," he broke off, vexed, seeing the child press its cheek against Felicitas's. "Do me the favor and don't keep taking that little monster on your arm. There's not a healthy drop of blood in it, and it may be catching yet." Felicitas tightened her arm round the child and held it to her with deep compassion. The little one was afraid of Heinrich's harsh look and hid her ugly face. Only the fair curls showed, and so the girl with the child in her arms made, for an instant, the loveliest Madonna picture. She was just about to answer sharply when the garlanded door opened. It had only been on the latch and now swung slowly back, giving a view into the room. It truly looked as if a young bride were expected. Vases of flowers stood on the window ledge, and the counselor's widow had just hung a long garland in graceful loops over the writing table. She stepped back to view her handiwork from a distance, turned her head, and saw the group outside. Perhaps the Madonna likeness displeased her. She frowned, called her maid Rosa, who was dusting the furniture, and pointed toward the door. "Come down this instant, Annie," scolded Rosa, hurrying out. "You are not to let anyone carry you. Mamma said so. The lady does not like it at all," she added tartly to Felicitas, "when Missy goes to everybody and lets herself be kissed and cuddled. It isn't healthy, she says." She led the bitterly crying child into the room and shut the door. "Ah, holy cross! What folk these are!" growled Heinrich, going down the stairs. "There you have your thanks for your kindness, Fietchen. Such people think their illnesses are as noble as themselves, and one ought to thank God if one's healthy hands are allowed to touch their miserable bodies." Felicitas walked beside him in silence. As they entered the hall, a carriage rolled over the market cobbles and drew up before the house. Before Heinrich could reach the door, it was pulled open from outside by a determined hand. It was already quite dim in the passage. One could barely see that a thick-set man's figure crossed the threshold. With a few quick strides, he reached the parlor door, which was opened from within. Mrs. Hellwig's exclamation of surprise and her dry words, "Ah, so you are unpunctual now, Johannes. We did not expect you till tomorrow," sounded out. Then the door closed, and only the waiting carriage and the lingering aroma of a fine cigar bore witness that the figure had been no fancy. "That was he," whispered Felicitas, laying her hand on her startled heart. "Now the fun can begin," grunted Heinrich at the same time, but he broke off and stood listening with a smile toward the stairwell. From above, it came rushing down like the wild hunt. The counselor's widow all but flew down the steps, her blonde curls streaming, her white dress billowing about her like a cloud. She left Rosa and the lumbering child far behind and appeared in a few seconds in the parlor. "Now we know, too, why the forget-me-nots were in the garland, Fietchen?" laughed Heinrich, and went out to bring in the newcomer's luggage.